Welcome into the Warchant.com report. Excited to be here as we get set for another football season. I'm joined by Gene Williams, the founder and administrator of Warchant.com, managing editor Ira Schoffel. I'm Jeff Cameron with ESPN Radio. They're going to play football this weekend, folks. That's right, 3:30 on Saturday, Doak Campbell Stadium. And even with minimal fans, I know we're all very pumped up. And I would like to mention a pregame show, by the way, which you can watch on Warchant TV via YouTube, I should say. Myself, Tom Wayne, going to be hosting that. Really looking forward to it. And then it doesn't stop there. As soon as the game ends, roughly 5 to 10 minutes after that, you can watch the post-game show. Gene and Tom will join forces and talk up Florida State's first football game of the year. Hopefully that is a win. Again, this game, 3:30, ABC, and Mike Norvell will make his debut as the head coach at Florida State. A lot has happened since Mike Norvell was hired back in December, fellas, and I think we can go through, just talk about December all the way to where we are now. There have been hiccups along the way, a lot of frustrations, obviously. Didn't even get a full spring, just the 3 days before they had to shut it down due to COVID. You had some of the off-the-field stuff because of the fact that obviously social media exists and kids get on it. And when they have frustrations with a coach or with a program, they're going to go ahead and lament that publicly. And so he's had to put out some fires here and there. But what's your impression, Gene, of the first 9 months FSU football under Mike Norvell?
Man, 9 months has seemed almost like 9 years of what he's been through without even coaching a game yet. It's unbelievable. Yeah. But the thing, just my impression of what we've gone through the last 9 months, inheriting obviously not a great culture at Florida State, dealing with a pandemic, having to have a pretty much entire off season be virtual. And then, like you mentioned, Jeff, a couple of these gaffes on social media, what happened with Marvin Wilson, Warren Thompson, DJ Matthews, all that kind of stuff that he's had to deal with. But what's jumped out to me from seeing all that is how resilient this guy is. He's dodged bullet after bullet. The Marvin Wilson thing, is trending as like the biggest sports story. 24 hours, it was a non-issue. The fact that he was able to turn that around so quickly and laying right back on his feet, I think bodes well for both in a macro and a micro perspective, that he's able to just bad play or two. He's going to make a quick adjustment. A bad game, I think he's going to make the adjustment. And I think that goes back to what we all knew about what he does well, and that's the organization, the detail-oriented nature that he has. I think that really bodes well when he gets thrown curveballs. He's got another scenario. He's got a way to adjust from it. So for me, his resiliency so far has been incredibly impressive.
Ira, your thoughts on that as well as your overall impression of the new assistant coaches as well. To me, obviously, this entire staff is impressive. Is there an individual or two that stand out to you?
There's a lot. I really have been impressed by this coaching staff, and especially because of who they're replacing. I just did not think that Willie Taggart did a very good job. One of his undoings was not putting together a staff quality up to the level that Florida State needs, and so I think that there's a lot of guys on the staff that I think you have to be really impressed with. I think most importantly, probably right now, would be Adam Fuller. I think the defensive coordinator. I've been really impressed with what we've heard from him, and they have so much talent on that side of the ball. It's funny, they've gone from a defense that was number 90 in the country in total defense last year, one of the worst in the country in certain categories, to a defense that I think people are expecting to be really a dominant defense this season. And so a lot of that's going to be on Adam Fuller. The pieces are there. You talk about the defensive line, what they have in the secondary. There's a lot of potential there. So there's also pressure on him to deliver. But I think he's a really impressive guy. And then Alex Atkins, the offensive line coach. I think I've been every time we've spoken to him, I think it's been impressive. They've totally overhauled what they're doing on the offensive line. If you go back to the group that was starting on the offensive line late last season to who they're rolling out as the starting five this Saturday against Georgia Tech, it's a completely different group. The only guy that really started a lot last year on that offensive line is Dante Lucas, and he was out late last season with an injury. So it's a pretty new group with a lot of new faces, but I think a lot of potential and a lot of high expectations and hopes based around what Atkins has brought to that group.
I want to add a little bit to the discussion there, boys, and mention that I've been very, very impressed with Coach Marv. I've also like to point out that it's good. It's always a good idea to decide to have your full allotment of coaches. On that side of the ball, it'd be good to have all of your coaches, unlike last year. So a secondary that is indeed talented and deep will actually have a coach, so that they'll know what to do with all of that talent as well. That, too, is very, very exciting for the potential of what this defense might do.
You like the idea of going with 10 coaches.
I think it's probably wise.
Did they make that rule?
Yeah. I think it's probably wise not to be down a coach, just in general. And I also think that you got to have guys who understand how to tell players who are very talented indeed what to do, how to do it, what you're looking for. This group of coaches have impressed me in ways that I really didn't anticipate. I have to admit to probably being a little bit jaded coming in after the hire. I thought, okay, well, we'll see. It's going to be fascinating to find out who he's able to put on his staff, meaning Coach Norvell. But it checks all the boxes. One by one, I've come away impressed with every one of these guys so far.
And I think what I, again, one of those things that it's not necessarily something you could point to on paper for why you think this team's going to be better. But I do think the fact that they all, there's a complementary aspect to these coaches. I mean, they're all on the same page. One of the things we heard a lot, certainly throughout Willie Taggart's tenure, was that the offensive coaches were not always on the same page with Willie Taggart. He wanted something different than what they were doing. And then last season, there was a lot of dissatisfaction on the defensive staff about the schemes they were running, what they were implementing. And I think that translates to the play on the field. If the players can sense that the coaches aren't on the same page, they're not going to have the same buy-in that you want. So I think that's a big deal as well, that this coaching staff has a much more cohesion than what we've seen in the last few years.
I want to talk to you about the offense real quick. I think this is important and interesting to think about in terms of how much better can they get with the same quarterback? How much better can they get with an offensive line that will be substandard? Even with the changes, they still don't have the kinds of players in terms of overall talent that you'd like to have. Florida State's offense was slightly improved last year. Not great, though. Well below FSU standards, 64 in yards per game, 75 in points per game. What can we expect them to do better? I would just throw out this. I think for starters, maybe playing as an offense to your defense and running fewer plays with the weaker unit of the two and not more plays is a good start.
I think so much of it's going to come down to James Blackman. Is he the same guy that we saw last season? Is he the same guy we saw 3 years ago as a true freshman? Or has he taken that next step? A lot of people were excited to see what this quarterback competition led to. At the end of the day, James Blackman wins it again. And there's a lot of talk about how he's taking a different approach, how he's managing his emotions. But we have to see how all that play out. I do think the one concern I have on the offense is you do go from Cam Akers to Jayshon Corbin. I like Corbin a lot, but I think Cam Akers is a real difference maker. So you wonder if the running back position takes a little bit of a step back. The offensive line, I think, can only go up. You'd hope to think it doesn't just stay the same. But really, to me, it's going to come down to James Blackman. Is he a fourth-year junior quarterback? Is he somebody that makes other guys on the offense better? Or is he the same guy we saw 3 years ago? And if he is, or last season, and if he is, then I think you start looking to a Chubba Purdy later in the season to help the offense out.
Well, I think for starters, you'd have to hope that this offensive line gives them a better chance. They're making a change at center, going with a redshirt freshman. They've shown that they're willing to shake things up in terms of design. Ira, you mentioned it before. So you got to help your quarterback out in that way. And I would also think that he's got some players to work with here. Gene, Tamorian Terry is a superstar, but let's talk about some of the other skilled players that we're excited to watch. Ira just mentioned Corbin. But Toafili, Warren Thompson now announced as a guy that's come all the way back from basically being kicked off the team to being counted on now to be a big-time factor with this receiving core. There is talent within this group if James can cut down on mistakes and if this line improves marginally.
Yeah, it's really the three guys you mentioned, the ones I want to mention. With Corbin, it's crazy. You mentioned the drop-off from Cam Akers. Think about that running back position, just almost the last decade, going back to Devonta Freeman. Then you got Dalvin Cook, Cam, all guys playing in the NFL at a high level, and then having to step into those shoes. But Corbin's not chopped liver. This is a guy that started at Texas A&M both kickoffs and running back. He goes 220 pounds. I think he's going to be probably your main back. But Mike Norvell likes to shake things up and run a lot of guys. Like you mentioned, Toafili. And that's a guy on signing day. I remember talking to Mike Norvell. As soon as his name came up, his eyes lit up. And we've been hearing consistent praise about him, whether it's the scrimmages or the practices. And I think, maybe he's a freshman. We didn't get a whole lot of playing time in those first few weeks, but I think by midseason, he's the guy that's going to work into that rotation. He's going to be impressive. But, yeah, Warren Thompson, how exciting is this to have two wide receivers that are over 6'3", over 200 pounds on each side? You don't see that very often. But, you got to pick your poison. I mean, obviously they're going to focus on Terry. If Warren Thompson can be that guy who's that big, he runs a 4.46 and puts that pressure on a defense, man, what does that do for guys like Cam McDonald at tight end? What does that do for Keyshawn Helton? It should open up all kinds of things for them in the middle. Again, it goes back to the quarterback if he can do that. And yes, I mean, those are some of the guys right there I look for. But there's so many young guys. Where you talk about LaDamian Webb, I mean, Corey Wren maybe gets in there in some packages because he's so fast. There's a lot of young guys to watch for.
Yeah, Ira, you want to add to that, or did we pretty much name them all? I'm excited about this group if they get, again, just marginally improved on the offensive line and they scheme away from James's weaknesses instead of asking him. You know, it's been the damnedest thing to watch James Blackman being asked to do several things he's not really good at over and over and over again. Can we just scheme away from that, please, and understand that he's limited? There's nothing wrong with that. You can win with that, but you can't ask him to do things that he's just not capable of consistently.
Yeah, and, you know, I think that if you look at for the first time in a long time at Florida State, we'll see. You know, this is all talk right now. It's preseason. Everybody can talk. Every coach can say what they want. Every media member can speculate as much as they want. We'll actually see it when the games happen on Saturdays. But it's been a while around here since we've seen a coaching staff that seems to be really adapting what they're doing offensively to the skills that they have. You know, Jimbo Fisher, I think, is one of the best offensive coordinators in college football. But that wasn't his strong suit. He really wanted his offense to be able to do everything. And he recruited to that. And he recruited at a high level. But when he had issues in recruiting and he didn't have the players he needed, he wasn't able to run the system that he wanted to run the way he wanted to run it. The last couple of years of Florida State under Willie Taggart, completely that's not what they did. I mean, you brought in Kendall Briles and that coach in that system that's basically they're going to run that system no matter who's at quarterback, whether it's James Blackman or Alex Hornibrook. Neither one of those guys could run the read option, but they were still going to try to do it. I really believe Mike Norvell and Kenny Dillingham, when they talk about putting their positions in putting their players in positions to succeed, I think that's got to be music to Florida State fans' ears, and I think we're all eager to see how it plays out.
Well, it's time to get excited because we're going to step aside here and come back for the second installment of the Warchant.com report. And when we do so, you're going to hear about this defense, which I think all three of us agree has a chance to be vastly improved, maybe even by any standard, very, very good. That's next on the Warchant.com report.
Are you the ultimate FSU fan? We're your ultimate Seminole sports source. Subscribe to Warchant TV, where we bring to life the award-winning website, Warchant.com. Here you will find added opinion and analysis from the #1 team on the Florida State beat, a staff that brings over 50 years combined experience right to your phone or mobile device. Unmatched digital storytelling, original recruiting content, access to the top prospects in the nation, unflinching post-game wrap-ups, and the daily podcast Wake Up Warchant. All free of charge every day right here on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and use the promo code WARCHANT30 for a risk-free 30-day trial of premium access to Warchant.com, home to the most active, passionate FSU community online, featuring exclusive insider access you won't find anywhere else. You're the ultimate Florida State fan? Connect to Warchant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Welcome back to the Warchant.com report. Very excited now because we get an opportunity to talk about a defense that I think is going to be asked to do things they're capable of. They're going to be put in positions to succeed. Players are going to be in their natural positions. We have a full allotment of coaches. Lots of reasons to be excited again on the defensive side of the football. They were massively disappointing a year ago. Terribly coached. It doesn't seem the coaching staff agreed as to what kind of defense they were supposed to be running. More importantly, if you think about coordination, the word coordination, right? One hand did not know what the other hand was doing most of the time last year with this defense. And so consequently, you saw guys out of position being asked to do things that they really weren't capable of. I'm thinking of Kando in coverage, amongst others. Obviously, we saw guys who looked like they were covering patches of grass as opposed to people, and never really understanding conceptually what they were being asked to do. Gene, why was this defense so ineffective last year? What makes you think there will be significant improvement this year?
It's really amazing. The more you go back and look at those stats, Jeff, it's almost impossible for this defense to be as bad as it was given the amount of talent on that side of the ball. I mean, they were 115th in passing defense. They had 9 Rivals 100 members in that secondary. It's almost impossible. You just roll anybody out there, don't even coach them. It's hard to imagine they could be worse than they were. So, yeah, that's unbelievable. Obviously, you mentioned the switch to the 3-4, which the coordinator had never done before. The players were not recruited to do that. Position was incredibly ill-conceived. Players looked lost, and when it didn't work, they just pretty much gave up on it and knew it wasn't going to work. That was a nightmare. But why I think it's going to be, and I do think not just improved, I think it's going to be dramatically improved because I think, you're strong at all three levels. You look, at least on paper, I mean, the emergence of Josh Kando, and he didn't even have to be what we're hearing in practice. He's just half as good as we're hearing in practice. Because you add him to what we know is going on in the interior of that defensive line with Marvin Wilson and Durden and the transfer and everybody else. They're so deep there. We know Janaris can be solid on that other side. And the linebackers, I mean, you look at the PFF grades, all those guys by the end of the year were playing much better than they did early in the year. Another year of experience, better coaching. We were all impressed by Coach Marv, what they can do there. And the secondaries, again, is incredibly deep across the board. And you get a guy like a Travis Jay who comes in, who brings all kind of talent and that Madison County work ethic. I mean, it's so solid across the board. It's hard to imagine, absent injuries, not being a very successful defense this year.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. I think they're also, getting back into their comfort level. They are talented on all three levels. They're also very deep at defensive tackle. This is a group on the whole that I would imagine everybody's excited about. But if there's a question mark on defense, Ira, what do you think? What do you think that is, first of all? And will we know a lot more this Saturday, after this Saturday?
Yeah, on first blush, I would say the linebackers are still a little bit of a question mark because that group really struggled so much the last few years. But I'm going to not go with the linebackers. I'm actually going to go with defensive ends to follow up on the point that Gene made. And we've heard so much about Josh Kando this preseason, and it really sounds like he's becoming that guy that was a 5-star recruit, #1 defensive end in the country coming out of high school. And I don't doubt that, but I do wonder how it plays out over the course of a game. The one thing about Josh Kando is he's never really been asked since he's been at Florida State to be an every down defensive end, to deal with the highs and lows of a game, to go through those battles that take place with an offensive tackle or two different offensive tackles during the course of a game, adjusting to what they throw at him. Do they chip him with backs? Do they chip him with tight ends? I mean, there's going to be some extra attention on Josh Kando, I think, based on everything that's been talked about this preseason. So how does he handle that? And then Janaris Robinson is a guy who has played a lot of college football, has not been super consistent in the past, and we haven't heard a ton about him in camp. So I think the strength of this defense is the defensive tackles in the secondary. But they can only do so much if you don't have contain on the edges, if you don't do a good job of keeping quarterbacks in the pocket. So to me, that's going to be my biggest question mark. And we may see, Georgia Tech's got some questions at quarterback. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So I don't know that even if they don't do a great job there, that they're going to be exposed. But I think every week, that's one thing we really want to pay attention to is that defensive end group.
And can you get pressure on the quarterback? Because I don't care how good your secondary is. If you are unable to generate pressure, those guys get exposed no matter what. That's especially true last year when they were running a scheme they weren't comfortable with and didn't know how to implement. But that's always true just in football in general. You don't get to the quarterback, you're going to get guys open. You're going to make plays. So the hope is obviously they're able to generate a pass rush as well. Special teams real quick, guys, before we get to Georgia Tech. I know we need to talk about this. Coach Papuchis, fun guy to talk to, certainly. And obviously – there have been nice reports at various times about what we're looking at in terms of punting, place kicking. Obviously, we know there's enough skill on this football team to field a punt for once, return kicks in an admirable way. Certainly a guy like Travis Jay, I would imagine, is going to be all over the place. Anybody want to chime in here? Gene, feel free as special teams, your overview.
Yeah, just you remember that introductory press conference with Mike Norvell, and he said it jumped out to me, special teams is going to be the backbone of our program, and it was at Memphis, and he proved that. I think he guaranteed they were going to have a kickoff return for a touchdown. I wish he would have done that here for this season. It'd be nice to see that. It's been a little while for that to happen. But, yeah, he's put his money where his mouth is. You talked about Travis Jay, for instance. He's listed as a co-starter at both safety positions, and he's listed as a co-starter for 2 return spots on special teams. And who are your 2 starting running backs? And they're listed as co-starters. So he's putting the best players, in the most important positions, not worried about injury or anything else. So it tells me he's putting his money where his mouth is, that there's a huge emphasis on special teams.
Ira, you want to add?
Yeah, and I would just say that I think, Alex Mastromano, the Australian punter, who's coming in this year, first year of American college football, I think is going to be a really big weapon. I think he does traditional punting, but he'll also do the Australian style kicks. And I think he's a really good athlete. He played Australian rules football, so I think that's going to add a dimension.
A little fake punt.
I wonder. He's also good. He's also in the mix as a holder.
Okay.
I think there's some potential there. And then we're hearing good things about the kickers. So we'll have to see how it plays out. I think it's encouraging that Ryan Fitzgerald has really stepped up. We saw a little bit in the spring of where he came from, what we saw a year ago, and he was certainly a highly regarded kicker coming out of high school. If he lives up to that billing that we heard about him 2 years ago, that's a big step too.
All right, let's get to Georgia Tech, the opponent for Florida State this Saturday at 3:30. And first of all, I'd say this: their second-year coach, Jeff Collins. Obviously, if you watched Georgia Tech last year and you're a casual fan, you saw a terrible football team. And they were having a very difficult time transitioning from Paul Johnson as their head coach and what they ran with that triple option to a more pro-style attack. But he's a tremendous coach. He is as well thought of in the coaching community as there is. I thought it was a good hire when they got him, but he's in it for the long haul. He understands they cannot overnight this thing. That was evident. They really struggled on the offensive line last year. We all talk about Florida State and how bad the offensive line has been here now for years. Well, I dare say, if you watched Georgia Tech a year ago, you saw an offensive line that might have been worse. They were dreadful, and they were hoping to get some help. They're bringing in a transfer from Tennessee, so you get an SEC offensive lineman to come in to help out. They thought they had a second guy, but he's now not going to play. So I still think this offensive line is terrible. They don't know what they want to do at quarterback. They're undersized on the offensive line as a whole. I think they're going to have a hard time again this year, but he's building for the long haul. They were ranked 122 in scoring offense a year ago. They'll be better this year just because they're well coached and they're transitioning. But I guess, Ira, I'll start with you. They haven't, again, at the time of this taping, named a starting quarterback yet. What do you think we're going to see from this Georgia Tech offense on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
And Adam Fuller talked about that this week on defense, that they really have to focus on what they do and be prepared for anything because it's hard to know. As you mentioned, Jeff Collins is a very highly respected defensive coach. He's been at a lot of different places. What they want to do offensively is they want to kind of similar to Florida State. They want to be adaptable. They want to do some spread stuff, some tempo stuff. James Graham was their quarterback last year for a decent part of the season. He's back, but he played poorly. He didn't complete, I think, about 45% of his passes, a lot of turnovers, just was not a very effective quarterback. Part of it because of that offensive line, part of it because he didn't play very well. So it's a 4-quarterback race. The other guys one of them is a true freshman that Florida State fans remember, Jeff Sims, who was committed to Florida State for a long time and decided, he and Coach Norvell decided that Florida State wouldn't be the best place for him. So he's at Georgia Tech now. They have another true freshman and a redshirt freshman that they're considering as well. But I don't think, from what we can gather, that they're going to win or lose based on their quarterbacks. They're certainly not going to win, I don't think, based on their quarterbacks. I don't get the sense that there's any superstar phenom at that position. We'll see on Saturday. But I think that they brought in some new weapons. They brought in some transfers at receiver. They've got some decent receivers. They've got some decent talent at running back. But it's going to be I think it's a really tough ask for them against this Florida State defense in week 1. And the one thing they have going for them is the element of surprise, because I think that Florida State really can't know exactly what they're going to try to do as they go into year 2 under this coaching staff. But I do think, I think they're going to have a tough time against Florida State's defense.
Yeah, I think they'd be better off going with Sims or Yates or one of those other guys at quarterback, because you noted it. Their quarterback completed 45% of his passes a year ago. You just watched Georgia Tech. They stunk in every facet. They are good at running back, but when you can't block, that's a really difficult task. I guess I'd ask you, Gene, is it possible that even though we feel like for certain Florida State had the worst offensive line in the country, there may have been a worse offensive line in our own conference and it belonged to Georgia Tech?
Well, if you go by Pro Football Focus, it's funny, they had their list of the top, bottom to top offensive lines in 2019, and Florida State finished at 129 out of 130. And yes, Jeff, 130, the honor goes to Georgia Tech. So they just edged out Florida State for that top spot or bottom spot there. So yes, they were on paper actually worse than Florida State. But here's the rub, and I want to get on Florida State's offensive line too much. Georgia Tech had a great excuse for this. I mean, they came in with they're running the antiquated triple option nonsense where the offensive linemen were undersized and all their job was to go out and crush defensive linemen's knees. That's all they were out there to do, to create that offense. So he's got to actually, Coach Collins has to put in a more pro-style offense, and he needs pro-style offensive linemen. So he's building that up from scratch. And we know at Florida State it takes a long time to build up those offensive lines when you're starting from scratch. So that's what he's having to do. That's why it's so difficult there right now. And you're right, he's got the transfer in Ryan Johnson from Tennessee, who started 19 games for them, and that's going to give him a lot of help at tackle because he's your prototypical, big-time college tackle, so he'll get an upgrade right there. But they do only return 2 starters, but like for Florida State, that may be a good thing. I don't know, as badly as those guys played last year. So this should be a fantastic matchup for Florida State. If we talk about that defensive line, how good it's going to be, they should be able to overmatch Georgia Tech and really both put pressure on the quarterback and contain that running game. And they do have a pretty good running back in Mason.
So if you're paying attention at home, you're assuming that this is going to be a lower scoring game, if that means a lot to you guys out there when we're looking at certain numbers. We talk about offenses and offensive lines that struggle. Maybe we want to look at a lower scoring game here. By the way, Georgia Tech runs a 4-2-5. Let's switch to their defense. Andrew Thacker is their defensive coordinator. They've got a kid, David Carey, who's in his 6th year. He led the team in tackles a year ago. Linebacker, really good player. Obez Jackson's a kid who can disrupt. They've got some players on the defensive side of the ball. They'll be better there. They've gotten better. They weren't anything to write home about a year ago, but they have a great defensive head coach who was the defensive coordinator at the University of Florida, Mississippi State as well. He's had big-time experience. So, Gene, I'll come back to you. Strengths and weaknesses for this Yellow Jackets defense, that 4-2-5 we're talking about.
Yeah, I think really the only strength, I think, of the whole team is that secondary. I mean, they've got some good players back. They've got all the starters returning this year. They've got a guy named Trey Swilling. You may know his father, Pat Swilling, was a star with the Saints back in the day, and he's a big-time cornerback, and he's getting some buzz for the NFL. So that's going to be fun seeing him match up against Terry in this game. But on the other end of the coin, man, that front 7 got pushed around big time last year. They were 117 against the run and 103rd in sacks. Put that sack number in perspective because, again, comparing to Florida State, who did not put pressure on the quarterback last year, Florida State had 25 total sacks, which is not good for an entire season. Georgia Tech only had 17. So this is a team that really has not done much up front. I expect some modest improvement from them, but this is a good matchup for Florida State's offensive line. They're trying to establish something here. They're not going to have a huge – they're not playing against a Clemson or something like that to start the season, so hopefully they get their feet under them a little bit in this first game.
Ira, how do you expect that Dillingham and Norvell will attack this Georgia Tech defense?
I think it's going to be a combination of I think there's going to be a lot of the running game. I think is going to be a huge part of it. Jay Sean Corbin is a guy that I know when Florida State's coaches were able to get him to transfer in, they were super excited. I mean, they do think he's the kind of guy, a workhorse kind of back who can really just kind of keep the offense moving. It's somebody you can really kind of build around. And then you've got the potential for big plays with those receivers, Tamari and Terry and Keyshawn Helton. So I think it's going to be I think they're going to try to establish the run and then try to make Georgia Tech kind of commit to defending the run and then hit them over the top for some big plays. I'll be surprised. I'll be kind of surprised if it's pass heavy early on. I think that's a lot to put on James Blackman. I think it's a lot to put on kind of a couple of younger receivers. I mean, Warren Thompson, who's starting, has never really played meaningful snaps, very many meaningful snaps for Florida State. Keyshawn Helton's coming back from his injury. You don't have DJ Matthews, who's a senior. So to me, I think rely a little bit on that running game if you can. If you can establish that, then hit some big plays. I think that's going to be the approach. We'll see. I mean, they could surprise me and come out and chuck it all over the place, but I would think they'd be a little bit more conservative early on.
Keys to the game for the next Warchant.com report in the next segment. Also, how big a game is this for Mike Norvell and his staff and this fan base? Obviously, they have not seen a lot of winning early in the season for Florida State in some time, a lot of frustration. We'll talk about that next in the Warchant.com report. Welcome back to the Warchant.com report. Time now for keys to victory and also what this all means for Mike Norvell and his staff and how important is this football game. I think Ira alluded to in our last Warchant.com report segment that the offense, obviously maybe kind of trying to run the ball here and set some things up down the line. Gene, I'll start with you. What do you think the keys to victory are for Florida State in this game?
Yeah, again, to echo Ira, I think first of all, just if you can establish a running game, you're going to be in great shape in this thing, because we know, look, we all have that vision of James Blackman from the bowl game, unfortunately, and I think putting him in positions where he can make mistakes against what is a pretty solid secondary, I don't think you want to do that. You want to go against their weakness, and that's up front. Hopefully, FSU's able to get some success there. But I'll say another thing, and I agree with what you said earlier, Jeff. I think this has the makings of maybe a low-scoring game. They haven't had much, really not a normal offseason. The defense is probably going to be a little ahead of the offense at this point. So to me, one of the big keys, when you do get in the red zone, is to take advantage of it. You may not have a whole lot of opportunities in the red zone. And I know Coach Norvell has been really harping on situational football, something I remember Jimbo Fisher used to talk about all the time. Again, a lot of work in the red zone. They need to have success both on offense and then stopping Georgia Tech when they get in the red zone.
Anything to add to that, Ira, before we get into the big picture stuff with Mike Norvell?
The only other thing I would say is just managing emotions, and that's something we talked to a lot of the players about this week. Is these guys have been through so much these last 2 or 3 seasons. Then this off season, not sure if they were going to get to play, all the things with coronavirus and the racial tensions in the country. There's been so many emotions. This is their first chance to get to play football. Half the teams in the country aren't even playing, but these guys are getting to. I think managing emotions is going to be a big deal. But also, at the same time, one of the hallmarks of Mike Norvell's teams has been that they play so hard at Memphis. So can you find a balance between those two where you have that great aggression and intensity while also not letting your emotions get you out of taking care of the responsibilities you have as well?
Yeah, if you can keep control of your emotions, that's a great point. But because I think you just got to make Georgia Tech earn it. Make them drive the whole field, put together 12, 15-play drives. I don't think they can. I think that they'll shoot themselves in the foot, and you can play field position and ride that defense. Don't ask James to do too much, and you should be okay if you're not turning the football over. I think Florida State is a perfect game, oddly enough, for me, for this first game of the season in the Mike Norvell era. And let's go ahead and get to that now. Florida State has not won a season opener since back in 2016. That'll hurt your feelings. Fan base is starved, obviously, for encouraging signs, something that will tell them that Norvell and this staff are different and that we're building towards something very, very special. How important is it for Norvell, his coaching staff, and the fan base to begin 2020, obviously, with a victory, guys?
Well, I'm going to say they need because it's been 3 years of hell, basically. If you're a Florida State fan, anybody says with the program, it's been awful for 3 years. You need something positive. But I think really at several levels, you need the buy-in. He's trying to get his players to buy in. I think they're starting to buy in. You're hearing a lot of positive reports, but I think showing it up on the field will really help them buy in. And I think the fans need it too. I mean, it's been awful starts and really awful season 3 years in a row. Getting that win in a game you should win to start a season, give them some positive momentum. The other thing we didn't really talk about much in the show is the recruiting aspect of it. I mean, the most difficult hurdle Mike Norvell has had to do in this pandemic era is coming off a team with 3 horrible seasons in a row, not being able to have the face-to-face ability to show these kids up front, come to our practice, come to our game, see what we're doing, let us show you firsthand we're doing. He can't do that right now. If he can show some progress on the field, these kids might go, hey, maybe this is the old Florida State. Maybe they're going to be pretty good again. Maybe we need to start looking at them. So I think that buy-in factor, and again, if you lose this game, you don't like the way that schedule works out because Georgia Tech was picked dead last by the voters. So that perception is, man, you lose to the worst team in the ACC in the next 2 of the next 3 games. You got to go at Miami, at Notre Dame. We could be back where we've been the last couple of years. Florida State starts out 1-3, everybody goes out. That's the same old Florida State. I'm out of here.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ira. I want to pivot to you because Gene's talking about big picture stuff here. If you were to look at this micro and say, well, a loss to Georgia Tech is devastating, but at the same point, this is kind of a nothing year. This is a get out of jail free card in a weird way because there are 0 expectations for Florida State to compete for this division title, for example. They know they're not anywhere close to being able to compete to be a top 10 team. So in some ways, you're just kind of figuring each other out, figuring out the system, the install. They didn't have a spring. You've got built-in excuses. But in other ways, I believe absolutely, Gene, what you just said, which is that they don't probably trust us, meaning fans right now, when we say this is a good coaching staff. They don't trust the fact that we say, hey, trust that this is different. Things are different. No, they're going to want to see it. And they're going to want to know for certain by the play on the field that there's a reason to invest emotionally, financially, you name it. And if they lose this game, that Georgia Tech team is terrible. Just say that's not a good football team. It would not be a good look to lose the home opener to a team last year that was near the bottom of every meaningful statistic. Your thoughts, Ira?
Yeah, I hate saying it's such a big game because we are talking about 2 pretty bad football teams from a year ago. I mean, this was 2 teams that were sub 500. One of them was 3-9, And so it's hard to say it's a huge game, but at the same point, to the points you were making and Gene was making, it really couldn't be much bigger for Mike Norvell. I mean, really the two biggest things, not necessarily about his wins and losses this year, but getting the boosters, the fans to buy in. They need something. I mean, I think they have been excited. They like what they've heard. They've watched the interviews. They've heard the coaches speak. It's been a huge change from what we saw a year ago. I mean, you just can't tell me that these two coaching staffs are in the same league. I mean, this is a real qualified, high caliber coaching staff, and they did not have that the last couple of years. So I think it's a big difference, but the fans need to see it. And then also to the point Gene made, recruits need to see it. I mean, they need to show something tangible to these kids because they get sold a bill of goods from every college and every campus in the country. They need a few games. That was what I was thinking even just a month or two ago. I was thinking, man, if they could just get a couple of games in, let alone 8 or 10, to just give people something, proof of concept, something that people could hold on to, it would be a big deal. Now, again, at the end of the day, to your point, this season is what it is. Florida State's not going to be probably hanging a banner at the end of the season or having a championship parade, but it is a big deal, and I think it's really, to your point with Jeff Collins going into year 2 at Georgia Tech, there's some unknowns there. I think they're going to be better than people think. They were picked last in the conference. I don't think they're the worst team in the conference, but if you lose to them at home, it's going to be just a really bad sign for a lot of people who aren't going to believe after what they've been hearing for the last 8 months.
Well, it's just a monumental rebuild at Georgia Tech, and they don't have elite caliber athletes. And so if all of a sudden he's able in year 2 to come in there and beat your team that does have high quality athletes, especially on the defensive side of the ball, then you got an elite talent and wide receiver on the offensive side of the ball. It's just an ugly, ugly look. Again, I don't think it would spell doom forever for Mike Norvell, but it would not be a positive sign. And things have been dead for a long time. You want to begin to ratchet up that momentum moving forward. All right, ordinarily, we'd go through a bunch of picks this weekend. I'd probably pick the best out of the 2 guys that are in front of me. But I won't get that opportunity this week because there are so few games. So Gene and Ira get spared here. I would also say this, a reminder. You can watch the pregame show on the Warchant YouTube channel. I'm really, really looking forward to that. Warchant TV via YouTube. Myself, Tom Lang, we will be on from 1:30, taking you up to game time till 3:30. Stay afterwards. Gene and Tom are going to do the postgame show on that same channel. Good content for you on Warchant TV on YouTube. Looking forward to doing that for this season. Now, on to the pick itself. Florida State is favored by 12. I'm having a hard time getting a handle on the game because on the one hand, we're always talking about matchups for Florida State. And if I put myself in Georgia Tech shoes, I'm thinking, oh, geez, do we really need to start with Florida State, the one team that I would argue has a better defensive line than Clemson? So if I'm Georgia Tech, I'm like, what in the world, guys? There's no chance to take a step forward here. And then that way I want to predict Florida State to blow Georgia Tech out. On the other hand, we didn't have spring football. We're in a new install. How good can Florida State's offense be in week 1 in their first game? I'm going low scoring. My pick, guys, 27-10 Florida State.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. I think a few weeks ago we talked about this a little bit, and I thought it would be a little bit higher scoring, but I'm along those same lines now as you are. I think it might be. I'm going to go 24-7 Florida State. I will note though that I think in the last 6 times Florida State and Georgia Tech have played, I think the games have been decided by a score, 1 touchdown or less. So these are traditionally pretty close games, but I'll go with Florida State 24-7. I think Georgia Tech's offense is going to have a real tough time.
Yeah, I agree, especially early in the season anyway. In a normal time, usually the defense is ahead of the offense. And, I think with so many variables here, you got to think. And I got to think Coach Norvell is going to play this a little close to the vest, a little conservative, maybe in the first game. Man, I think it's even lower scoring than what you guys are going to say. And I say they're not they're going to win, but I don't even know if they're going to cover. I'm going to go 23-13 Florida State. Pretty low scoring, get ahead, maybe just really grind out the clock. But I agree with what you said earlier. I think, man, this is a situation where I think the fans may not like it. They may be deep in their own end. They're 25 and there's a 3rd and 8, and they may just run the draw a lot more often.
I'm fine with that.
Defense, rely on the defense, rely on your special teams. As Ira said, Mastermano's got a great leg, so ride your strength. Do not put James in that position. I think the score may be down a little bit if you do that, but I think that it gives you a much better chance of winning the game.
fewer plays on offense, not more plays when that's your weak unit. So I'm for that. For Gene Williams and Ira Schoffel, I'm Jeff Cameron. Aslan, thank you as always. And thanks to all of you for watching the Warchant.com report. Again, pregame show 1:30 to 3:30 on Warchant TV, YouTube, postgame right there as well. Be well, everybody. Go Noles, and we'll talk to you next time.